Putting in draft. There we go. There we go.
There it is.
Okay, thank you everyone for your patience and those at home eagerly waiting by your YouTube. Thank you also. I call to order the August 14th, 2024 meeting of the Housing Blue Ribbon Committee. We will take roll call. I'm Assistant Mayor Kelly, Councilor Tabor,
Here.
Mr. O'Leary.
Here.
Mr. Anderson,
Here.
Tracy. Here. Again,
Here.
Mary,
Here.
Councilor Moreau. Here. Absent, we have Byron, Jen, and Megan. And then for city staff,
Peter Stitt.
Howard Snyder, Housing Navigator.
yeah,
Jennifer Smith, Legal Department.
the legal department. Okay, we can jump right into it. As everyone knows, we have just finished this city staff, the city manager and her team have finished going over the RFQs for the Sherburne School redevelopment project. And we are now moving it into the RFP. They had 8 proposals that were RFQs that were submitted, which was more than I think a lot of people thought. Out of that criteria, 4 developers were selected to advance onto the RFP project. We are moving very quickly on this for anyone who's at home who doesn't have a backstory. The RFP, the city manager's office is looking to send that out on Friday. And so I requested that the housing committee be able to find some type of consensus to add to the city manager's memo, to send a memo to the city manager of some of the things we would like to see in the RFP. As a reminder, we are an advisory board. So her and her staff could take as much or as little of the input that we have on the RFP for that. But once that does go out and goes public, I will make sure it gets sent out to this whole committee too. So I think with that,
Yeah, I think we really want to just hear from each of you. Your thoughts. We gave you the city manager's areas for feedback that she wanted. I'll just review what I recall from the council meeting, and my fellow councilors can correct me if I'm wrong. On the question of disposing of the existing building, although some people thought it was good to have the developer have a blank canvas, I'd say most people supported the idea of a proposal with and a proposal without. And you know, the mix and type of housing, that was a very healthy discussion if you watched it. I'd say that the sentiment on the council was we need a range of income from not just 80% or not just 60%, but from of an average median income, but you know, maybe up to 100% and then down to 60%, those kind of ranges,
Or even lower.
or even lower, 50%.
Sure.
We didn't talk too much about additional municipal support, except that there was a sentiment that it's better to have the developer have a mix of incomes than have the city have to subsidize. And overwhelming support for a ground lease versus selling land. And I think there was a sense that the softball field will be replaced elsewhere in the city at the community campus. And so that's less of a priority to keep versus the discussion about the building. So those were the sentiments that we got. And now it's your turn. So
yeah, and I think one of the things too that we discussed when we were talking about the building, which is a couple of the developers, I don't know if anyone in here has researched the final 4, they are listed in your packet. That packet is also available online. Some of those developers have done creative things like keep the facade of a building, but then build housing behind it. So I know there's a lot of, you know, for some people, emotional attachment with that building, but I think it's also worth noting that that building has been pretty much neglected for the last 15 to 20 years while we had some of our most at-risk students in that building. But there's some of the developers have done creative solutions to keep that facade, keep that front, which I think is hopefully, you know, we'll get some creative solutions or creative ideas out of the RFP respondents.
we really do want to hear from each of you tonight.
You want to start?
Yeah,
Sure.
let me just go through quickly. I did submit my thoughts to the co-chairs for, as Counselor Tabor suggested, if I send it out to everybody and people start responding, it becomes a meeting, so let's not do it that way. So anyways, the existing building, I like the way the staff and the manager have presented it. The fact is that giving people options, one versus the other. I think that as the assistant mayor pointed out, some of these individuals, some of these entities have been quite creative. And I certainly don't want to be in a situation where we present something that stifles their creativity. Because we don't know all the answers. They're professionals. They may suggest something that we hadn't thought of. The other thing I just wanted to, on this item, we've talked about keeping the building or leveling it and starting with a clean slate. Another option that may be presented is to carve out the building. I wouldn't be surprised if someone decides that, yes, seems to be a sentiment to maintain the building. However, it's not what I do. So I will present a proposal that carves it out. I will do what I do well, which is develop affordable workforce housing and let the city decide what they want to do with the property and, on their own. So again, in addition to the two options that the staff and the manager presented, there may be a third or fourth or fifth different types of option. With regards to the mix and types of housing, again, I would leave that open to the professionals and let them, they know what works. There are a lot of different components that come into that decision, massing, financing, and all of those things. The other thing again, that I would, offer is that if someone decides that they want to keep the building, that's going to be, I'm kind of jumping back and forth, but that will be an expensive proposition. They may suggest that they have some market rate housing included in the project. And use the funds from that market rate housing to fund any work on the building. Again, types of options available. Additional municipal support. I think that the city, with the concept for this project, is that the city will make available to a developer a piece of property, which I've said before, I believe is worth somewhere north of $7 million. I think that's a pretty good contribution. I wouldn't see the city making any other contributions unless the city would have a financial benefit. There may be a proposal put together that the city would provide money, but also would be reimbursed for whatever that amount is, plus a reasonable return. Ground lease, I think that's a pretty straightforward one. I think that everyone is supportive of the ground lease. I haven't heard anything separate other than that. With regards to the softball field, this is an area that it is my understanding that when the middle school was renovated and expanded, the cost of moving the softball field, what used to be old Alumni Field, up to Granite Street was part of the school department budget, because that was a cost that was associated with that field. Counselor Tabor and I both serve on the police station, the community policing facility work group. Throughout that process, everything, whenever we looked at a field that had a playing field associated with it, whether it was Granite Street or Clough Field, we were told that if those fields are taken, that the cost of replacing those fields had to be borne under our project. And the other thing I do also want to mention is that one of the other sites that those of you who did did the site visit was Granite Street. And if that is chosen to be an appropriate site for affordable workforce housing, that will take that field, and who's gonna cover that cost? So it's my suggestion that if the softball field goes, that the cost of relocating that be something that is borne by the developer. Those are my points on the 5 issues.
Great. Thank you, John.
That would pose that would pose a question, I think, to legal, which is if the city's already allocated funds and are in the process of doing through CIP, the softball field, how we could potentially pass on any costs of that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Well, and again,
Well, because it could be like an impact fee or X, Y. and Z.
well, again, the other thing too is, if I can just pick up on that. The field at the proposed field is going to take place regardless of whether housing is done or not. What we were told when we, with the police station, is that there would be an additional field built because it's not a question of, you have an inventory of playing fields. The idea is that if, again, the one at the community campus is built, why can't we add to that inventory? So that certainly, because frankly, when we were talking about it, we were told that if we took, say, for instance, Granite Street for the police station, that a new softball field would be built at another location that is available, so.
Yeah.
But thank you.
I think that's a great point.
Yeah.
Mr. Anderson, you emailed, but if you could share with the rest of the group.
I tried to take some time to put some thought into
did great.
the categories. I'll take them as they were presented, but I think the disposition of the existing field, I think I've had an opinion all the way along that school should remain. It's and for some type of reuse that would be proposed by the successful developer. There's other components in there. I mean, I think this project is kind of a test of what is to come throughout the city with other sites. And so to do it, I'm not saying to do it wrong, but to do it respectively is gonna be something that people are gonna gauge this particular project against others that are selected or discussed in the future. I think I'm not sure how to approach this, but I mean, you're gonna get, you're requesting 2 types of proposals, one with, one without. Without doubt, the one with has limitations to the property that's available. And that strikes into the density that you have, or the potential density that any project will be developed. Once you take the school, if you take the school down or select a project that's without the school, then density is gonna go up. Or density is gonna go up, or if the creative developer can incorporate green space in there that makes it more compatible with the surrounding neighborhoods, I think that's at the discretion of the developer. But I think green space is a important component of whatever's going to be the final result of this. I think that building, yes, it's tired. I don't think it's done. I think there is some reuse application for that I would leave to the discretion of the developer, saying, here's, we've had some experience with this. This might work better with leaving the school as it is, or have the school remaining. And that's my opinion. I could go on, but I mean, I think that's my opinion. And whether any proposal at the discretion of the developer or the city council, whatever they decide, they've made the decision to have developers submit 2 proposals without a commitment to one or the other. But if the proposals receive priority in some respect with the school or without the school, I don't know how that would be incorporated into their plans, and the costs associated with it. With regards to the type of housing, I'm not an expert on this, but that remains within the creativity of the developer. We've seen one proposal before this developed into a RFQ, RFP from PHA, and it did have that type of concept, with what they've invested into, planning or options. And so I think the illustrative process is going to be important for us to take a look at to see how it blends with the neighborhood and the community, surrounding community. I think there was somewhere along the way, there was a request for responses saying that West End Yards, what is the effect on West End Yards? What is in Middle Street? And I think that was extending that opinion from communities that are not close or, close to the development. I still maintain that Sherburne Road, Greenland Road, Coulterville, Holly Lane, Panaway Manor have the potential to be the most affected neighborhoods out of this. And extending it beyond that, I think, is a stretch. I don't think there should be any additional municipal support. I think I expressed that in my, in what I responded to. I mean, the city, John just said that the new softball field is coming regardless of what happens, but probably a little bit of a preference to say that because we're losing one field, we're going to replace it. So there's a cost to the city. I don't know. Everything's $1 million these days. So I would say, there's $1 million and there's a considerable amount of investment by the city that wouldn't be borne with any impact of how the project develops. Ground lease, I think it's pretty consistent that the ground lease is a preference. I'd be interested to see, since with a variety of developers, is what's the management policy over the long run with whatever type of lease is developed, 70 years, 99 years. What is this successful developer? What's its history with that? What's its plans for that? I think the only thing we have a comparison to is what we've seen locally with PHA. That's not a preference statement, but I mean, it's a fact that, the management of the facility, the long-term management of the facility is just as important as the development itself. If this is something that's going to 50 years from now is going to not be well managed, maintained, so on and so forth, I think I don't know how the RFP would incorporate that thought, but I think it would be appropriate for them, any developer to express how their long-term management policy is. And I've stated my opinion on the softball field. So I guess that would be it at the moment.
Thank you.
And you felt on the softball field that
The softball field, it's going to be regardless of whatever takes place here. I think that the softball field is going to be the strongest component of where any building is going to take place. So, I mean, that just seems automatic. Another thing is, does the dimension of the property extend? I think we all know where the city is and with what the city owns. There was some discussion of development. It's not of the one residence that's in between that city property and Orchard Park. And if and how or when that becomes a component of any development.
I would say that that would be between the developer and that private residence.
Correct.
Right.
That would have
There could-
nothing to
correct.
do with the city.
But that would be it. In any case, that would be how a developer responds or presents any illustration of what they propose to do. Well, you know, should there be a third with that property incorporated into development or without that property incorporated into the development? But I don't think it's a topic that the city can get wrapped into now because it just makes things much more complicated, but it's important. I think it has an important component to what's finally done. So let the developers, present what they think is appropriate and I guess I think it's important to see some type of illustration of it at some time at the earliest possible date so that people can get an idea of what potentially might be the final outcome.
It's just not the disposition of the softball field. I believe the city council is looking for guidance from the housing committee on what other type of open space, either passive or active space would they like to see requested in the RFP. An example, if they're taking the softball field away, would there be any members of the committee have a desire to see a small playground put back in place? Some type of amenity that could be shared, just not by the people living on the site, but from the neighborhood.
I think I've expressed that in my thoughts, and that I kind of encompassed in green space, how that green space, any green spaces to be developed, whether it's, has a recreational component, an aesthetic component to it, whatever. But I think that's an important part of any proposal to see how it blends, how it blends with the surrounding community.
And that's echoed by Megan Corsetti too in her letter that she sent, ample green space. So I'll share that with everybody when we get to it. Tracy,
Well,
might want to pull your microphone a little closer.
so just more of a big picture. In general, I think really getting way too into the weeds in that it's a mistake to ask for designs before you ask for public input. This is backwards. It's gonna bite you. Do the public input first, then ask for designs. Also, if you're gonna ask for designs, specify what level format you're asking for. A design developer firm can spend 12 months designing something, or they can spend, 2 hours doing a napkin sketch. There's a very big difference about the level. So I would expect the RFP to be very clear. Usually when there's a request for 2 designs, if they're well-developed designs, you would often pay the short list a stipend because it takes a huge amount of time to put designs together, especially if you're asking for 2 whole different schemes that could take months for someone to develop well. So if the if the RFP is clear enough and says we just want, a site plan sketch, then that's a whole different thing than saying we want a building design with renderings and unit counts and full budgets. That's a different thing. I see a conflict of requests, one saying, look at a scheme showing the building demolished and then also provide a green passive house design. Those are 2 different things. Existing buildings are the most sustainable thing as long as they're not dangerous. And if it's possible to reuse them, they have a lot of what we call embodied carbon, which is the energy it takes to build them in the first place. If you tear it down and rebuild it, you'll never regain that lost energy. Even if you put solar panels and make it passive house, you're already underwater. So make up your mind. Do you want a sustainable project or do you want the maximum amount of housing? Probably, you can make an existing building energy efficient. Let's see, I think it would help compare apples to apples if there is clarity on either scope or budget. Right now, there's nothing. It's like wide open. And you're gonna get a whole range of different proposals, and people are going to gang up on their favorites, and it's gonna kind of become a popularity contest. Like someone likes cherries and someone likes apples and someone likes oranges. So if there's a way to have one common denominator between all the different requests, then it can be more fairly evaluated. And again, try to allow the opportunity for public input by not locking into a design in the RFP process. I think, oh, the last thing I'll comment on, I'm not going to comment on the financial legal support because I know nothing about that. But the mix, 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units, I think that should be left open as well for study and public input. It needs careful thought. What about studios? Those are the most affordable units. They're not here. What about co-living? That's even more affordable. That's not here either. So I think that needs to be probably left open. If we could simply say, this is how much we want to spend, or we want X square feet, that will allow a better analysis of what meets the needs. For example, the building codes say they regulate buildings based on square footage. They allocate 200 square feet per person. And that can be anything. That can be a 5-bedroom house. It can be a studio unit. It can be a boarding house. It can be a mansion. It doesn't matter. You get 200 square feet per person, and that's how many people live there. There might be a way to look at that site, compare it to the people per acre of the community and say, well, maybe we double the density, maybe we triple it, maybe we keep it the same. Whatever that magic number is, that's translates to people per square foot. Then you can put a square foot parameter on your RFP and then let the public have their input and the designers do their job. So that's my comment.
Thank you. For someone who I assume has looked through RFPs, it's nice to hear.
From the other side,
The other side of.
it
of
helps
how-
to have some structure, just
And I would agree with you about putting too much parameters on a design for an RFP. I mean, we will have a public process. I think if we look back on the deadly word, aka the McIntyre, where we had design as part of, and then the community changed its mind and then things went all kind of wacky. I think if we put, this isn't, and as you said, there's a huge investment when you're looking at building out full design. And so ideally, I would say, I'll say this again, it's my turn, is that whatever developer we go with for this project, I would hope would have a good amount of community driven conversations to then impact what the end design will be.
Yeah, I guess not to sound like a shill for the PHA, but that's why I felt all along that this process should have been for the next project. I believe the number I heard was they had already spent $100,000 working on the Sherburne, and to not partner with them, I think would be offensive, especially if I was on their board. I'm not, by the way. Disposition of the existing building, I think preservation's desirable, but ultimately it's about how do we get the most number of units while also honoring the character of the neighborhood. And especially if there are adaptive funds available, having just listened to Tracy, I'm adapting my thinking now, hearing what you were saying. Maybe it is best to try to figure out how we use the current building, but also making certain we're maximizing the number of workforce housing that we're putting in there. There was one note in there about neighborhood and community-based uses. And I think if we are going to do something like that, they should be uses that are complementary towards the type of people we're trying to house, Something like a buy donation gym or Gather where there's access to affordable meals. Not more businesses, because if we're trying to provide workforce housing and we're putting another business in, that taxes the workforce available to the currently existing businesses. As far as mix and type, again, it's like, how do we net the most amount of units? So if that does mean putting in a couple of market rate units or properties in there in order to double the amount of lower income units that we're putting in, then I think that would be wise. I don't know much about the city providing financial support, so I can't talk too much on that. We're a very affluent community, so if there's the ability to do that without putting strain on our other needs and desires, then I would be for it, but again, I don't know how the budget works out. Ground lease, I'm all for it, no ownership model on this property. And then the softball field seems to me to be a non-issue, given that we are intending to replace it 1-for-1 at the community campus. I did a cursory Google search of softball fields in the area and yielded a number of results. I frankly don't find the softball field that compelling of an argument, given that what we're talking about here is whether or not people will be around to play softball in the future if we don't start doing something now. So that's my piece.
Mary?
I think at this point, I'm not sure what new items I can add. I think in terms of the disposition of the existing building, I'm happy either way. I think Tracy brought up a lot of good points regarding the RFP process and what that feels like on the developer creating the proposal perspective. I think it is a nice building with beautiful perennials and the best lilacs I've ever seen. But at the same time, I think finding the sweet spot between creating a number of affordable units is great. I think perhaps unlike, I don't see when we're thinking about keeping in line with the neighborhood, I think that there's a lot of leeway there. Because I think there's a separation between the single family housing on the other side of the highway. And so nearby is an office park. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there to create something either new or innovative without being held to other character of homes. For the mix and type of housing, I think it would be beneficial to look at the mix and type of housing already available as affordable within the city in terms of number of units, number of bedrooms. And I think also looking at that against the study, the needs-based study, I think. I would imagine, and I like the idea of 3-bedroom units to just better support local families as well. I would not feel great about fair market or like market rate housing, even if it subsidizes. I think the genesis for all of this conversation is around creating affordable units. I think a mixed income is great, just not on the fair market side.
How would you feel about 100% of average median, which is
For 100% of 100% or
100% AMI, which
No,
is
but,
below market.
yeah. I think at first I wasn't totally jazzed about it, but if it helps benefit the much lower income, that was a need that was cited in the housing needs survey that we saw for Portsmouth Listens. So if that's a way to help bring that in, and then I think whenever there's a diversity of housing, it's a diversity of income levels, it creates a better housing experience, and then you don't, yeah. And then when was the conversation? Oh, I don't have a sense or understanding of additional municipal support. So I cannot comment on that. Ground lease, I think that makes the most amount of sense. I think I'd love to understand. I don't understand how the property would be managed and how it would feel from a tenant's perspective. So I think there's like 2 parts of the property management. So I'd love to learn more about that and how we can ensure that the folks living there have a good experience, considering it wouldn't necessarily be like a HUD program. I would like to see, a mixture of, like a mixed use space, that had different services and offerings, including potentially a commercial space. If you're bringing in a number of individuals, this area used to have a convenience store. But other than that, the only thing you can walk to from there is, the hospital
Hospital.
or C&J. And then if you really wanted to risk it, maybe Target. So if you're thinking about needs, people always need to like run to the corner store and get, a gallon of milk. If you're thinking about community spaces, I think the community space, there's a lot of organic community spaces that happen either in like coffee shops or other retail locations. And so I know that's not great necessarily from, so there's a cost associated with that, but I think that could help create a more actually used third space for folks. I would love to see innovative open space as well. I think Penaway has a park and a playground and a field. So there's a lot already happening there that is already used, but perhaps something to complement that. I think another playground is always fun, or something that's kind of eye-catching and that would create an opportunity for community members from across all the different neighborhoods to come together. I don't know. That's a kind of a pie in the sky. I'm sure somebody would have, I'm sure we'll get cool proposals for that anyway. But I think that should be included. Softball fields keep coming up, and I don't think it's necessary for this conversation, but I'd love to learn more about softball and baseball fields in the city. Because
A lot of baseball.
we have a lot of baseball fields. I thought we had a lot of softball fields, but maybe we don't. But because the other couple locations also have fields, I'd just love to understand the sticking point on that, because I do agree that we need to retain populations and help folks flourish in our city in order to keep having, folks to play softball. And then I also didn't realize there were adult leagues for softball. So now I'm really understanding why there's so much competition for softball fields. But I think that's everything.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's great.
All right, I'm pretty much gonna say the same thing I've already said at city council.
Say it in a few sentences.
As few sentences as possible. I think the existing building should stay. That's my gut instinct. I think it should be reused into, my three categories are senior housing, a daycare, and a community center. If we could get all three, that'd be great. If we can't, then maybe some subset of that. I think a daycare center would be really helpful to not only the people living there, but a whole surrounding neighborhood, because I don't think there's a whole lot of childcare on that side of the city. Mixed type of housing, I am all for going 20% to 100% AMI and having a mixture of incomes, a mixture of bedrooms, a mixture of housing styles and types, whatever really works and is marketable to all those people. I'm against doing any additional municipal support except the land itself, which we've already committed to. I only want a ground lease. I don't want any ownership. And I think we're already replacing the softball field. We don't need one, but it would be nice to incorporate some sort of open space for not only the residents living there, but the adjacent neighborhoods as well that could be used. I don't know what that looks like, but something that could be a sort of community gathering space of outdoor activity. Was that short?
That's great.
Very good.
Okay.
For a lawyer especially.
Yeah.
So my opinion, and again, this is where, as Tracy says, we get in a little bit of weeds. The disposition of the building, I agree with you that it's, as you're gonna say, it's cheaper to keep her, right? So it's less impact. My concern is when we have notions of a daycare center, recreational facility, we already are maxed out on staffing. So when I look at, when people have said numerous times, can this be a community center? We already have a brand new community center, a community campus. We're already maxed out on staff. When we look at budgetary needs of the city or budgetary requirements of the city, I think that should be an impact when we're having community conversations down the line. But as the same with childcare facilities, they're hard to staff, they're hard to man. That's a business that you have to look at. So what I would look at is in the RFP is putting a line in there of, and I think as we have said from the council standpoint of a community impact. So, but I think it's worth noting too, as we get into community discussions down that road, is that the developer can say, hey, we want to put a daycare facility in here. Doesn't mean a daycare facility is gonna want to go in there. So I think we have to be really realistic of what a developer can control versus what they can't. And they're, as has been said before, they're the experts of what the market can handle in certain aspects. When we talk about mixed type of housing, I would say that I am opposed to anything under 1 bedrooms. I think when we look at what our community is trending towards, we are losing families. And I think we need more 2 and 3 bedroom units. I.e. at like Atlantic Heights in Maple Haven, in Panaway, where we have 2 and 3 bedroom units, whether for purchase or for rental. I think that is a scary trend that we're seeing statewide. And we're really seeing it locally, especially as we talk about the constant dwindling, slow trickle number of our student body. We're losing, 10 to 20 students a year, and we're not getting those replaced. So I really think that we have to look at and figure out ways, and we have talked about in other conversations, to incentivize family first housing or family focused housing. When we talk about municipal support, I think the city should stay in line with our 2006 adopted housing policy, which says that the city will do certain actions or supportive actions, not necessarily monetarily. I think a lot of times we assume municipal support is money. But our 2016 housing policy says we'll look at, for affordable housing products, we'll look at the number of parking spaces needs. We will look at tax incentives and abatements in the way that we have before. So I would support municipal support in the way that we have it in our policies. We say that we will look at waiving variances for affordable housing and things like that. So I think to stay within the policies again of almost 10 years within our city, to me, seems the right thing to do. I think universal, we all say ground lease. Impact on softball field, again, I feel like, it was a very fundamental policy, spoken policy of this council that we were going to replace a field for a field. But I definitely think, as we see with any site plan, you're going to see some open space, you're going to see some green space. We have a city requirement, we have a zoning, we have zoning policies for that. So obviously any site plan that's going to go in front of the zoning board is going to have to follow what our current policies are. So I don't think we have to think about them. The impact on the softball field, to me, is off the table as another one that's being built. When we talk about though community impact, I think that a good example is when that hotel was looking to be increased at Port Royal Place. I'm sorry, at the Port Inn, members from the Panaway community came down and spoke against it for traffic impact. I live on Coakley. Members of that community spoke. So I think that we cannot limit community impact to a 5-foot radius. The same that, when West End Yards was going in, people that lived on Route 1 down the road talked about when developments downtown are going in, other community neighborhoods are discussing it. So I think we need to make sure that we are not pinnaring saying this is our community. We only have the impact. I can tell you if there's concern about, from which I've heard from Panaway Manor, about Borthwick Avenue that directly impacts my neighborhood of Coakley, that directly impacts the West End Yard, that directly impacts Cottage, and even all the way out to like Dennett and things. So I think, again, the same way that when we go to other neighborhoods, we want to make sure that we're looking at broad spectrum of community impact and community input. I want to make sure that we are not limiting it to just what one could consider direct abutters. Because if you actually looked at direct abutters for Sherburne, and no one in Panaway Manor is a direct abutter. Only Sherburne Road and in
Orchard Park.
well, in Orchard Park are direct abutters. So again, I want to make sure that we are having whole organic conversations about bigger than just your next door neighborhoods. But yeah, I would say that again, you, as Tracy said, site map or site plan versus design is, I don't know how we verbalize that in our feed, but I think we need to make sure that the community understands and that the council understands that we should not be looking at an aesthetic design, but more of possible layouts and I'm looking at as close to max capacity as could be done at that location. I think that this committee made a majority vote of trying to get 500 units, you know, affordable units permitted. I think that this is the rarest of the opportunities, as we have seen the other lots or a lot of the other lots. This is the rarest of the opportunities that you'll get where any displacement of a field could be rectified easier. That, you know, overall impact could be mitigated. So I just want, I think we need to look at, and that would be a formula that someone answering the RFP would respond to. Ideally, I would look to them to try to create a formula to justify their number of units.
Great.
John?
First, I agree with Tracy that we should build into the RFP a robust public input process at the start. And I went to the charrette at Service Credit Union. In one day, they were able to test a whole bunch of concepts just at the sketch level. I think that was valuable. Also, from the timeline, you know, if there's a healthy public input process, say this fall, after we select the developer, that sets you up for design and tax credit in August of 25. So in terms of the school, I've seen PHA run a daycare center at Gosling. That's very successful. I've talked to PHA folks who are interested in senior housing as well, or it could be less than market rate income permanent housing that they buy. I think all those are good concepts. So I like the idea of both. You get your proposals both ways. In terms of the mix, the big thing I would like to see is, I think communities, these projects thrive when there's a mix of all kinds of people. So from as low as Councilor Moreau said, 20, 30, 40%, all the way up to 100%, try and get the whole range. And added municipal support. I agree that the land is the big give on the part of the city. If there's things we can do with parking, great. If there's things we can do with infrastructure, like turn lane, something like that, you know, whatever. And certainly we should lease it. I think leasing is a way to make sure that the developer keeps it below market. And I think if you allow the school reused, I don't think you can keep the school and the softball field. And we're going to replace the softball field. I think the density would go in the back. And, you know, I'm on record as saying a minimum of 80. We'll see what the developers think they can do, but I certainly agree that this is a property that we can do more than any of the other city properties. So those are my high points.
Are you gonna read Megan's?
Yes, let me read what Megan said. It's only one page. Here are my 5 thoughts. Disposition of the existing building. I feel it's important that whatever additions are made to the area, they blend well with the existing area. In speaking to some of the immediate impacted neighbors, preservation of the school did seem important, as it is something they are familiar with viewing on a regular basis. Also, with the initial proposal made in January 23, with a large-scale development, keeping the school seemed most important, so that way several multi-story buildings would not dwarf the surrounding homes. That being said, since we are looking at this more as a blank page, I think it's important that we have an addition that feels blended with the community, one that's welcoming and desirable to newer residents, and will allow the scale of the project to be a little more modest to help address the concerns expressed by community members of traffic and congestion in an area that's already bottlenecked. Mix of housing, stick with rentals. That's the most definitive way to ensure that the costs remain affordable. I think it should be considered to include a mix of below market workforce and market, with the majority being offered at workforce rate. The diversity is important and we have needs for both. This also offers an opportunity for people to stay within their desired community, should their income grow in the future. We want to keep talent, right? I'm also open to seeing plans that include bringing some amenities to the new and existing neighborhood. The master plan cited such ideas, but we have yet to see that happen. Griffin Place is often used as a comparison and touts that they have the best view in Portsmouth. This site won't offer that, but we could make it lovely with some amenities and beautiful green space. Regardless, the plan should include something that fits well into the existing neighborhood. The transition between the commercial hospital district was made at Orchard Park. They don't have tall buildings, and the design itself complements surrounding homes with hipped roofs. Be respectful with the scale and density. Municipal support, agree with the comments in the packet. Be upfront about needs and support. I'm leaning towards not much more support than the land lease itself, but we would really need to understand the ask of the prospective developer. Ground lease, I favor ground lease for 50 to 99 years. That ensures the new community has appropriate upkeep, and there's an escalation pathway should there be a concern noted by an immediate neighbor or new resident of the new community. Softball field, please support a design that leaves ample green space. The community currently uses the softball field, but also the immediate neighbors use the green space on the corner a lot. Kite flying, soccer, catch, dogs, etc. Thinking about new people coming into the community, we will need additional green space to share and make us all feel at home. I'd love to see the city stick to having the back acres used for the development and keep the front half as a beautiful public park for the new residents and current residents to enjoy, sort of like Goodwin Park. Those are my thoughts, and I appreciate your consideration. Thank you. So that's Megan.
Okay. Yes, Aaron. You raised your hand.
I don't know whether it can be incorporated with the developers, but and I don't know whether the city would take a position on maximum or minimum amount of units that would encompass the development. Naturally, if there's going to be one without the school, one with the school, I don't know if the city would take a position to say one application would have a maximum amount of, we've seen proposals through PHA of 140 down to 80. So, and I think there was a lot of opinion developed about, those visual aspects that's the only time we've seen any type of, rendition of what could be. So I'm not sure if the city can incorporate that in an RFP to the developers, that in one application, we would like to see a minimum maximum. We can do it on a square foot basis. I was more prone to think 80 units might be somewhat appropriate for, the school staying there and, development in the back, but I would just want to mention it, because we're going out with 4 developers, you leave a whole realm of proposals coming back. Who's to say that they could be 200 units, or they could be minimum amount of units, or it's going to be good for us to review whatever comes back from proposals in the best like for like situation, so that we can gauge it on a like to like basis. There you go.
I just want to make a note, just based on what you said, I want to make sure that we as a advisory committee and the people at home understand that we will not be reviewing RFPs that will go to the committee. That will be done by staff. So we will not be selecting developers, as far as I understand. We will not be ranking developers. That will go through the traditional RFP process, which is done through staff. But I agree with you that so maybe that is a line that we put into to the memo that we will send to the manager of we want to make sure that the RFP or the respondents include different land massing of projects, which I would assume, I'm not a respondent to an RFP, but I would assume if you would look at this, you have been following along with the community. And you are also, I would assume that we would see plans potentially that will have large scale, because it is their job to develop affordable, permanently below market rate housing. And so if that is your company's sole purpose, you are going to do it to a large scale, because that is what you do. My company's job is to produce coffee. We produce a lot of coffee, because that is what our job is to do. But I'm not sure, that would be up to, again, I want to make sure too, that we all understand that we are writing an advisory memo. What goes in the RFP, comes down to the city manager's office and her staff. John.
Yeah, that was my question, I about how we were presenting our thoughts. I mean, I'm sorry, but a memo written by a committee, it's certainly a difficult task. My suggestion, if meeting is taped, the manager and the staff can see the meeting, I don't think we need to do anything more than that.
Or a set of minutes.
What's that? The minutes, the tape, they've got the whole thing. I think that, the problem is it's somebody who writes a memo, and I don't care who writes it, but whoever writes a memo it's difficult to not reflect their own opinion in it.
Yeah, and I think that, when Howard and staff and us have discussed it, we have talked about that there can be multiple opinions in a memo that can say,
I understand that.
some, members, the consensus overall was this, there were certain members who did not feel that way. I don't know if the city manager, I think we need to have something sent in
That's-
writing.
That was
based
my
on-
suggestion, that's
Yeah.
all.
Yeah, just based on time, I would agree with you if, the RFP wasn't trying to go out on Friday.
Yeah.
But I
That's
think
fine.
We have to have some type of,
I recall that the motion made by city
Was a
council that they
memo.
voted, requested a memo back.
Yeah.
The memo can certainly state, this is a summary
Mhm.
of opinions and thoughts. For full in-depth coverage of the activities, then go to the video, so.
Yeah, very good.
Okay, so that's what we'll do.
So
then.
will we see the memo?
I don't think there's time.
Yeah.
I mean,
They need to get it like tomorrow in order to incorporate it for Friday.
I didn't say, can we see it for input? I just said, can we see it?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I think we took it as, can we see it before it gets sent?
That's not what I said.
Yeah,
That's not right. No.
Yeah.
Can we see it?
yeah, I don't see why not.
So, and so when it's generated, we will get a copy of it.
Yes, so as I think some people have, if you'd like correct me if I'm wrong, Howard, I think the easiest way for people, do you still want people to email you anything, or do you feel like you have pretty?
If they have follow-up thoughts, that'd be
Okay.
fine.
Do you have follow-up thoughts?
Like, huh?
I think there was a lot of us who had
Yeah.
consensus with some.
Right.
some they want.
Before midnight.
Not Friday.
Howard, would it be easier for you if we typed up follow-up thoughts, or if we feel like we're good? Like, what's easier?
If you write them out and send them to me in an email, that'd be great.
I have a question, and this may be able to be answered and maybe not. Do we know, and this is not our fate, this is the piece of property, do we know by right? Like, if we sold off this piece of land, by right, how many units could be built on that?
If you
Depends
sell
on the
it,
zoning.
the zoning has to change.
Yeah.
Right.
So then likely not many, because it
Not
would
many,
probably
'cause then it would be
be
single.
zoned single residence B, which is the surrounding zoning.
Yeah.
So that's why it's good to have the ground lease and keep it under municipal.
Municipal,
so
so
that
then it could
it's-
be done.
we can
More flexibility.
Do whatever.
Well,
I
yes.
mean, you have a lot.
Within reason. Okay, well, that is what our meeting was about. Any
Yay.
other,
No members from the public.
There's no members from the public.
Shocked.
I'm shocked too. That's what I thought was gonna take. up my-
Given my visit to Panway last night, I thought there'd be a bunch.
Yeah,
I didn't
we were
see
talking
ya.
about, going into to the chambers the other day.
I truly,
Yeah.
We're all shocked. I
But
think.
again, I think as a reminder to everyone in this committee and everyone at home that we are, now we're finally getting into step one of this project to try to iron out who a developer would be. And then there will be, as John said, we'll be going after 25 credits. If the developer chosen is using the federal housing tax credit incentives, those will be going out in 25. So there is a long process ahead of us. Okay, any other, Eric, Mr. Anderson?
Just with regards to the public, I mean, this subject has seen a variety of responses to this type of project, from the
More than we
from the
thought.
meeting at Sherburne down to meeting here where there's nothing. I think it's critically important that whatever the developer plans on making a proposal, that I think Tracy said it, that there is a public process, a very, very public process as the design or the selection takes place. And I think that can only be done, with some type of visual, conceptual plans. But I think that is critically important to this, to what's presented in the RFP and what would be the obligation of the developer to interact with the community.
John?
Peter, could you just walk through what the process, I mean, I understand it's a city-owned property, but even being involved in other projects before where the city has gone through a process, what would be the process that would be followed to kind of answer Eric's question? What would the process would a developer follow on this particular property, even though it's city-owned property?
You mean just as far as plan approval?
Land use.
I mean, so they would still go to our technical advisory committee.
Yeah.
And likely, I think we talked about the other day that it would go to the planning board.
Yeah.
For site plan review, I mean, not for zoning because it's municipal, but for site plan approval.
Right.
So there would be opportunity at the technical advisory committee. They have public hearing and public comment
Mhm.
as well as the planning board.
Good, thank you for that. Yeah.
Yeah, and an important fact I think everyone needs to bear in mind, and especially in the public, is these developers can't get tax credits without an approved plan
From planning board.
from planning board.
Now, what was just explained was a procedural process under the particular departments, whether it's planning or zoning or anything. But I mean, is the proposal or the RFP going to include something additional for outreach? Which is
Right,
not part of-
that would be, what I was talking about would be after, the public outreach.
So, Eric, just to maybe line those dots up a little bit, what RFP response, a developer gets selected, and then they proceed into needing to create a certain level of documentation to go get the tax credits. You can't do that without the public input and review through the city. So I would certainly think that outreach to the public first, high level thinking, start getting it down on the ground, and then get into the technical documentation to get it through the city, so they could then meet the tax deadline and tax credit deadline in what's August, right? Because it got moved to September, but I think it's usually August.
Traditionally August. And then if they want to then look for any type of other federal type funding in X, Y, and Z.
Right.
Is this enough time to do that in a year? Realistically,
Depends on the
I,
developer.
this is what I would
Right.
say. I'd say all four of these developers know what the city's timeline looks like.
Right.
They all
Right.
are experts within the field
We
of
got it.
building below market rate housing. I would entrust that they feel confident that they can do it.
They can do it.
let's hope so.
Yes.
Will we adjourn?
Well,
Can I
well,
ask?
I thought that you were looking at me for.
Since we're at like this step one and we're looking at other properties as well, would it be beneficial to kind of think about what could have been done differently to get to the step one and how we could start that for some of the other properties that we're considering? That way, I don't know, we could proceed with positive community input
Yeah.
along the way and
That's a
start
good point.
engaging now.
Yeah, I think what would be great would be if we could maybe work with staff and get kind of like a rundown of, step one, if we identify, if a committee or so-and-so identifies a piece of city-owned property, and then how it goes past there, and including, when do we do community outreach, when are meetings held, X, Y, and Z. I agree with you. And so that is maybe something we can touch on for our next meeting, on that next agenda, and we can really work through flow, all of that. I think on the forefront, I will own up, I think as a new city council with a new city manager in 21, when this project got was coming about in the Sherburne School, I think there was a lot of new people managing of something that I think thought like, hey, PHA's done this before. Hey, I think the community will back it. We've done it dozens of times throughout the city. And I think it was just handled in a way that showed that we were all new at doing a lot of this. So I think it's good to look at, we've done it before. So we do, besides, a scale this big, we do have history of how projects like this have been done. So when we look at that, it's time to refresh it, time to look at, communications have changed, all of that. So I think that's a good agenda item for our next meeting.
I'll offer up a little bit of support to that, in the sense that we're already learning from what happened before. When we're going out and doing these site visits,
Yeah.
we're inviting the public.
Yes.
We're getting a lot of turnout. So
Yeah.
it doesn't come, when did this start? And you have to say 6 months ago. When did it start? Well, it started.
Starts today. I was using your line of, we're at, we're not even at step one right now. We're at step 0.25.
Yeah.
And I think I started using that the other day.
Yeah, and I think in those meetings with the public, we've said, we're gonna try and do this in character with the neighborhood, as you were saying, Tracy. But, we do have a housing crisis.
It's a
Keep
crisis.
pushing on.
Well, as I've said to you, if you drive down Woodbury Avenue, where the old Woodbury Mansion used to be, beyond Coakley Road, not Coakley Road, behind
Would,
Boyd Road,
yes.
in that area there. You don't know that there is subsidized housing sitting there. It fits nicely into the neighborhood, and I would hope that, what we do going forward is received as well into the neighborhoods.
I hope someday, John, that we don't even use the term subsidized housing and we just think about it all as a place for our neighbors. Okay, any other comments before I look to John for a motion to adjourn?
I just want to quickly add that I'm sure and very confident that the committee members are adding their rankings after each one of these site
Site
visits.
visits, don't
So
forget.
they'll be up to date and current and
Anything for you.
Well, I think as a
by the
reminder,
time we finish,
we
so.
only have Howard until November, right? Potentially. The grant runs out in November. We'll see what happens.
Hope that grant.
We've got
I
4
wonder.
properties done and we got.
The
another
governor
5,
said-
so.
Is there still money
Oh.
left in the grant?
We
keep
could have,
going.
we'll have a
That's-
different governor, no matter what.
The deep dive on the financials is the grant can support the salary and everything
Yes.
else through the end of November, so.
Yes,
Lots to do between now and then.
lots to do.
Feels
Okay,
comfortable.
so look to John.
Move we adjourn.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you all so much
Thank
for
you all.
coming in.
Happy